4th, 2024, Seminole County Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, this board is a 7-member board appointed by the Board of County Commissioners. A quorum has been established to hold tonight's meeting. Public hearing items acted upon by this board are referred to the Board of County Commissioners for further consideration. Board members present tonight are, from my left, Lourdes Aguirre, Commissioner Carissa Lawhern, Commissioner Mike Lorenz, myself, Chairman Dan Lopez, Commissioner Richard German, and Commissioner Brandy Iapolo. Staff present tonight are Joy Giles, Principal Planner, Jose Gomez, County Manager's Office Chief Administrator, Nisa Borkert, Deputy County Attorney, Vladimir Simonovsky, Development Review Engineering Manager, and Tammy Brushwood, the P&Z Board Clerk. Staff, tonight's meeting will go as follows. Staff will introduce the item. The applicant will present the item. Audience members wishing to speak will then be heard. Please complete a comment card and give it to the clerk if you wish to speak. Comment cards are located in the lobby. Speakers should restrict their comments to information directly related to the item being heard. Audience speakers will have 3 minutes to speak, or 6 minutes if representing a group. When called, speakers should approach the microphone, providing their name and address for the record. The board may ask questions of the speaker. After all speakers have been heard, public comment will be closed. The applicant will be given a chance for a rebuttal. Any items shown, such as videos, presentations, pictures, or maps, must be left with the clerk for the public record. Items shown from electronic devices should be emailed to the clerk. A motion will be made and seconded. Board discussion may occur and conclude with a vote. I will request a roll call vote for any split votes. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the proof of publication. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Next, which one did I do? Did I do the minutes or did I do public hearing items?
Publication.
I did. I skipped over. All right, so next on the item is going to be the approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Aye. Are you seconding?
We have a-
I'll second.
We have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. All right, next we go into public hearing items. Item on the agenda is going to be the expedited building permits, SB 812. Joy Giles presenting.
Good evening, Joy Giles, Principal Planner for the Planning and Development Division. This item is the expedited building permit Senate Bill 812. This is a request for consideration of an ordinance creating a process for expediting the issuance of building permits for residential subdivisions before a plat, before a plat is approved and recorded. Currently, Seminole County allows for up to 5 model homes to be constructed prior to the approval and recording of a plat. The criteria for the model homes is that the final engineering of the subdivision must be completed, and approximately 90% of the development must be completed, including stabilized roads, temporary street signs, and water service providing for, providing for fire protection. During the 2024 legislative session, the Florida legislature passed Senate Bill 812, which requires the county to initiate a program no later than October 1st of 2024 to expedite building permits, allowing up to 50% of the lots within the subdivision to obtain permits prior to the approval and recording of the final plat. Let's see. Oops. Seminole County must issue the expedited permits provided that the following conditions are met. The preliminary subdivision plan and the final engineering plans must be approved. All Applicable utility companies must review the subdivision plan, and the applicant must provide proof of such review. Permits must be in accordance with the Florida Building Code. An emergency access and water supply and a water supply plan must be approved by the fire marshal, and street signs must be installed. And the applicant must provide a performance bond for up to 130% of the necessary improvements. The staff has determined that the associated ordinance amending Chapter 35 of the Land Development Code complies with the requirements of Senate Bill 812. And some of those changes you can see on the slide. There were some corrections to the code. There was some additional language and definitions added as well.
Joy, can I add something here?
please.
So I reviewed this statute, this bill, once it went through, and have been helping planning and zoning staff with implementation of what's required under the Florida statutes. So part of the review criteria, I should say approval criteria that applicants have to meet before they can be approved for this. And the real world effect is, before the final plat is recorded, applicants can come in and ask that 50% of the building permits for the 50% of the lots be issued by the county. So if you all understand how the platting process works, you come in with a preliminary plat, you put in all your infrastructure, you make sure everything's in place, you go to final plat, and then you start selling off lots afterwards. And typically, with the exception of model homes, houses are not constructed on those lots. This changes that substantially to allow for a developer to come in and get building permits for 50% of the lots. So what we did was made sure that you have the preliminary site plan approval, the engineering approval in, addressing, you have a emergency access and water source plan, pre-addressing so that emergency services can get to you, can get to the construction site where the home's being built. That's why the maintenance bond's at 130%, because there's more risk involved here. And another requirement of statute is anyone that comes in with this application has to sign a hold harmless, and the language is in the statute of the hold harmless, holding the county harmless for anything that may occur, any liabilities that may occur by issuing these building permits prior to final plat. One thing that there are restrictions, and those are in the ordinance too, and the restrictions in the ordinance mirror the restrictions in the statute. And those are, you can't transfer ownership of the lots till the final plat's recorded, so you can build all these spec homes is really like, well, maybe not spec, you can come in with a contract and say, yeah, but you can't actually transfer ownership until after the final plat's recorded. You can't obtain a CO until after the final plat's recorded, and you can't allow occupancy of the structure until the final plat is recorded. So the hold harmless and these three restrictions are what we have, what the statute, what the legislature has given the county to be able to mitigate some of the risk involved in this process, but we are required to implement it. And we have integrated into our code and set standards for requirements. We also added a new requirement that applicants submit a plot plan for each lot showing where the structures are going to be. So we have those beforehand before we issue the building permit to them, so we can make sure setbacks are complied with, and we know where things are on the property. They also have to provide a final engineered site plan for that lot once it's complete. So I just wanted to kind of give you a little more of an overview and get into the nuts and bolts of the ordinance.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so staff has determined that the associated ordinance amending Chapter 35 of the Land Development Code complies with the requirements of Senate Bill 812. Therefore, staff requests that the Board of County Commissioners approve the ordinance amending Part 2 of Chapter 35 of Section 35.6 of the Land Development Code of Seminole County to establish an expedited residential subdivision building permit issuance process pursuant to Section 173.073 Florida statutes and Section 35.44 of the Land Development Code, to require as-built engineering plans for expedited building permits, providing for conflicts, providing for the codification in the Land Development Code of Seminole County, and providing for severability, that's a hard word for me to say, and providing an effective date. And this concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the board?
I have some.
Okay, go right ahead, Richard.
Was this rushed? This is not, I think there's a lot of holes in this ordinance, the way it's written. I mean, I think it's fine, but trying to get it done, but can I just ask a few questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, on page 5, 6A, the final engineering plans must be approved. What does that mean? By who? Utilities, Public Works, both? I mean, don't you think you ought to define approved by who? If I'm trying to conform and get some building permits, I don't know what you mean there.
Well, the Land Development Code, the subdivision regulations require the Development Review Committee to approve the plans. Is that?
No, but final, not final engineering plans. Final engineering plans are approved after the facilities are built, correct?
No, final engineering
You want-
plans
you
are
want 'em-
approved prior.
Well, then that's where I'm trying to get.
Yeah.
Approved by who?
The county.
Approved by the Development Review Committee of the
Well,
county.
why don't you say that in here then, I think?
Does that need to be?
I mean, we could put it in here. It's in the portion of the code that talks about who approves the final engineering
Well, it
plan.
doesn't say so here. I mean, just make it clear when somebody's trying to, if I was trying to do this, I don't know and I'm in the business. I'm not sure what you mean here, what I could do. You'd probably tell me, but why not make the ordinance a little clearer?
Sure, we can
That's all.
reference back to that section of the code.
That's all, okay. Then on the next page, E, installation of street signs in accordance with, and you cite all that, why don't you say in accordance with the approved engineering plans, because the street signs are contained on those plans?
The street signs are approved by addressing. They're not approved at time of the final engineering plan review. They're approved separately from addressing.
But I got to install them, so.
Correct.
Addressing doesn't approve the installation.
Well, they do go out and visit the site to ensure that the street signs are installed correctly with the correct name.
Once again, I wouldn't know what to do here. I mean, it just, you guys do whatever you want, but I don't think you wrote them very well. In F, it says for 130% completion of the uncompleted necessary improvements. Not sure the definition of necessary. I think you're meaning the required improvements pursuant to the engineering plans, aren't you?
That's a reference to the section in the Florida statutes, which defines what the necessary improvements are. If you
You
go
don't-
back to subsection 4.
You don't
it says-
reference the Florida statute.
I do. So
Where?
if you says, as described above, if you go under section 4, which states bonds, the applicant, that's on page 4, the applicant is required to submit a valid performance bond to guarantee the installation of necessary improvements as per section 17703, subsection 9 Florida statutes.
Okay. Okay. And the next part 4, required submittals. Required submittals for what? To get the permit to build a house? Is that what you mean in part 4? It just says required submittals for what?
On page 6.
Yeah, on page 6.
Well, it defines required submittals for the final plat. Let's see.
Yeah, but is that required to get my permits?
But I'm confused. Where are we?
Page
Page 6.
Page
Page
6.
6 of the ordinance.
Page 6.
Line item 132.
It just says required submittals. What does that mean? For what?
Oh, no, that's referencing part 4 of the code. So those dots mean we haven't changed anything else in that section, and then we move to part 4 of the code, and then those dots mean we haven't changed
So-
anything in that part of the section, and then it goes to section 35.
Do I have to submit all this to get my building permit?
No, this is just a reference, nothing's changing here. This is just a reference to that portion of the code.
But if you read it in the context of the ordinance, I don't think
Well, in the
it's-
context of the ordinance, the required submittals are on page 3.
I understand that, but this says required submittals.
I understand what it says.
I mean, it's not clear. I mean,
So this is just a reference to what part we're changing next in the code. So, for example, we're in chapter 35, part 2. If you go back to page 2, chapter 35, part 2, procedures for securing approval of plats. Then we change section number 35.16.
but all
Then
this
the
is-
next change that's made is for part 4, required submittals. And then under required submittals, we're changing, in section 35.44, we're changing subsection E. So this is just a way so that, this is how we have to draft an ordinance, so that we show where the changes are being done within the code itself.
So is there, I'm back to the same thing. If I read this, the required submittal to get my building permit are these items here?
No, this is the required submittals for a final plat. So as part of the final
It
plat.
never talks about a final plat.
Well, it
It
says
just
that in
says
35.44.
Okay, but is that, the way this reads in the ordinance, it's like it must be required for me to get my building permit. It's not clear. Listen, am I the only one missing this? Is anybody else kind of,
Well, I kind of feel like what they're showing us here is just the changes that are being made, right?
That's correct.
Right, so this isn't.
well, this
the
is the
entire-
final ordinance.
And that some
It's
of the
missing-
definitions you're looking for might appear in other parts that they
They're
don't
in
have
other
written down
sections of the
here.
code, yeah, that's
Because we're
correct.
missing sections here,
This isn't the final.
which are the dot, dot, dot.
Right, those are sections that are missing in the dot, dot, dots.
I mean, it seems like it would be a little easier to present it like a red line or something, but yeah, my understanding from what she's saying is that these dots there are some definitions in there that we just don't see.
So this is out of the code already? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the
not
underlined
rewritten.
portions are brand new.
Pardon me?
The underlined portions are brand new.
And the asterisks haven't changed.
And the
Yeah.
asterisks haven't changed, and nothing else has changed, other than the strike-through, which the only strike-throughs are to change the subsection numbers.
Okay. I give. I don't have any more comments.
I have a question. So obviously, there is certainly an eagerness to expedite the permitting process. It's my understanding that the developer can start selling off or entering into contracts, individual plats, prior to the final approval of the plat, right? But they cannot transfer ownership of those individual plats.
Of those platted lots.
There's platted lots,
Yes.
right. There is no standard contract in new development. So what protection, if any, is there to the consumer should a final plat never be approved? Worst case scenario.
Right. So, I would assume that in the private contract between the developer and the subsequent property owner, the buyer, there would be some provisions in there. I mean, there's a risk involved, but that risk is to the developer, not to the county, as far as, the county's done everything it needs to do to comply with the statute and allow for this. But as far as the consumer goes, so really it's in, they can sell this lot, but they can't have a deed that references the lot, because a deed when it describes the lot itself, it references a recorded plat. So they could enter into a contract, and then the home could never get built, or it'd be like in any other instance where when a developer enters into a contract with a buyer and doesn't do what they're supposed to under the contract.
Actually, I could close by meets and bounds. I don't have to have the plat noted on the deed. I can close by meets and bounds.
Sure, yeah, you could.
Which is, by the way, not proper. I mean, it says in here you can't convey property prior to
Right.
plat. So it does say that in here.
Well, it says on page, what is this, page 4 of the laws of Florida, an applicant may contract to sell but may not transfer ownership of a residential structure or building located in a residential subdivision. And so my understanding is that that can be done up to 50% of the potential plats in the community. I guess, I'm in the business
That's
of real
correct.
estate, so I guess I'm just looking at this from the consumer standpoint, you know, I guess it becomes more of a caveat emptor, right? Certainly the county isn't at risk, but perhaps the consumer might be.
But are you just concerned with respect to like the escrow deposit, the return of that?
Well, because with new construction, it's usually a higher amount.
Right.
You know, so that's just my thoughts on it. Any other questions from the board?
What difference would it be that in a development that you're putting your 20 or 15% down and still you're not closing until the.
Because with
your final
those, prior to this, the final plat has been approved. In this case, it is not. So the builder is actually able to go out and start selling up to 50% of the plats without a final plat approval. So I'm just thinking worst-case scenario, what if that doesn't happen?
I guess it wouldn't be any different than if they don't have the funds to finish the construction.
Sure, but that would be the fault of the consumer, right? But not the,
Right, there's definitely risk involved here.
Right.
I am
Risk
not,
reward.
I saw this when it came through, and I was like, oh, just had to put my hands on my head, but, you know, we've tried to we've tried to require as much as we can to protect the county and the ultimate purchaser without requiring more than the statute allows us to. We've really tried to do that with this ordinance.
Let me go back to this Part 4 if I could. You told me Part 4 is lifted out of another ordinance and just put in here as written? Is this out of another ordinance, this whole section, Part 4? Or was it written for this ordinance?
No, this Part 4 exists now.
Is what?
It exists now,
As written?
yes. Yep. The only thing that was added here is the subsection E, the underlined portion on the next page, on page 7 at the top.
I do agree that if all of it would have been included more like a red line, it would make a little more sense to understand.
Right, and I mean, we can do that. It's just for the sake of length, these sections were very, very long, and sometimes it's hard to go through and see where the changes are being made then the changes get lost. So this is typically how ordinances are done. Sometimes when there's substantial revisions, we will include a strike through and underline that's not the ordinance, just for the reference point. But in this case, in addition, just to what's in here, we would provide all the other sections of the code as they pertain to a preliminary site plan, final engineering plans, all those other sections of the code too.
I can't provide you Section E if I'm platting and I haven't finished the improvements. If I bond the improvements, I can record my plat. I don't have as-bills because I haven't finished building it yet.
Right, this is for the final plat.
For the final plat, I can bond my improvements and record a final plat. If my improvements are only half done, I can bond the rest and record a plat. I can bond all my 130% of my improvements remaining, certified by my engineer, and record a plat. So I don't have any as-bills.
That's correct. But for the expedited, this only applies, if you look at the last sentence, this only applies when the developer is utilizing the expedited residential subdivision permit process. It doesn't apply generally to the normal platting process.
But if if he's doing an expedited permitting process, he hasn't platted yet, so he doesn't have any as-bills. I'm sorry, I'm really slow tonight. I don't see how this dovetails together.
Hello, Jose Gomez, Chief Administrator. The requirement for the as-built will only be when the final plat is recorded. That's why it's in the section for the final plats. And the reason for it is that the county, there's a risk in allowing the building permit to go forward before the plat is recorded because if those lines change, the setbacks might be off, that sort of thing. So with the final plat recording, That's why it's in this section, to require that with the
But-
final plat
but you-
recording, to make sure that the structures meet the requirements.
But you'll allow me to record a final plat if I bond it,
Absolutely, yes.
then my improvements are not completed. How do I have as-bills?
This would be once,
I'll have them later on.
you'll have as-built for the lot if,
It doesn't say that, but, I mean, you.
and this is a
I had-
post-construction
Before-
survey, so you're.
Before I get my bond back, and before I get engineering and Public Works to sign off, I have to provide as-bills.
Yes.
But I can plat without as-bills.
That's correct.
But you got it in here as a requirement of the plat.
Only if you're using the expedited building permit.
But then I can't use the expedited building permit because I'm expediting my building permit without platting.
So what we're trying to avoid is you come in, you build 50 houses out of a 100-lot subdivision.
Yeah.
You don't get a final plat first. All those houses are built 5 feet off the property line that you originally established in your preliminary plat. If we don't have an as-built of where that structure is on the lot, before we record the final plat, we can fix it. They can move the lines and correct it. But after the final plat's recorded, if all those are 5 foot into the setback,
100%.
we have
100%.
all these
But what you
issues.
say here is as-built engineering plans. That's totally different than the as-built for the structures that have been built. As-built engineering plans are for where I put my sewer, where I put my water, where I put my
Well-
drainage. You're now saying something totally different,
Well, we're
which I understand what you're saying. You want an as-built survey, if you will, for the lot of what's been built on that lot.
Yeah.
But
so
that's not
it's-
what this says.
Well, it says submittal of an as-built engineering plan herein defined as a post-construction survey signed and sealed by a registered land surveyor in the state of Florida.
I got it.
Identifying all property lines and locations of all utility easements and construction improvements.
That's not
Shall be
it.
required for each lot within a residential
It's
subdivision.
not really an engineering plan, but it's okay.
What would you suggest a better name for it?
Let's go to the next question.
Let me think about that. That's, it's an as-built survey for the structure that's been constructed. That's what you're after. Now, I guess it's not
You
engineering
can think
plans.
about it. I mean, I'm not being flippant at
No,
all.
I'm not either. But it's not
Our
engineering
job
plan.
in bringing this to you, and your job,
I
which we'll
got
go
it.
through in the workshop, is to bring out things like this. So if you think there's a better name to call it, or something that's more appropriate for what we're asking for, we're happy to listen. We want that feedback.
I mean, it's an as-built construction survey of the existing residential improvements or
Of the
houses
lots.
built.
Yeah, right.
Just within the lot.
That's what you're after, not the engineering plans.
Yeah. That's correct.
Oh, boy, I got one thing.
See, we'll admit it.
We got there. Did you want to make that an
So
official
what would we
recommendation?
cross out engineering, the word?
Well, I think what we can do is take this feedback and go back to staff, and staff can think about it a little more. We'll also need to look through the code to make sure whatever we decide on is not referenced in other places. You know, you have to be careful there when you're defining things. So we don't have to decide it today, the name, because or you can suggest a name and we can go back and look to see if it's referenced anywhere else in the code to make sure we're consistent. And we'll do that afterwards anyway if you don't have a suggestion, but we can take that as notes, definitely.
So then what do we do with this tonight? Like table it until the next meeting?
That would be at the will of the board. No, I'm sorry, you can't do that. Just in this case, it has to be done by October 1, so we're coming up against a hard deadline. So what I would,
That's state law now?
it is the state law, yeah.
So we can
and-
do it as a recommendation.
Sure, yeah, you're recommending to approve with the comments as provided by the board. We have those in the minutes, and the staff can go back and look at it further before it goes to the board. It goes to the board on September 24th, but we have to meet that date, or
So-
we'll be out of compliance with the statute.
The process won't
Go ahead.
change, it's just the verbiage on how
Yes.
you explain how the process is
To
complete.
clarify.
Yeah, to clarify.
So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just one other clarification back on page 3 I missed, I'm sorry.
Three.
On page 3, under the submittal requirements, down in B, application fee as per adopted fee schedule. Now, once again, not clear to me, does that mean they need to pay the impact fees too, don't they? At this point in time? I'm getting
Yeah,
a
the
bill, I'm
impact
getting a building
fees
permit.
are, yeah. So, yeah, those are paid when the building permit's issued, at building permit issuance.
So that, you
This
think,
is,
you think that,
this is the application fee for the expedited building permit application
but you're issuing a
itself.
permit, so do you collect the impact fees then, or when do you collect them?
No, we'll collect them at the time the building permit's issued. So this is just the application,
I got it, okay.
this is just the
Yeah,
application. So
agreed.
when the building permit, that'll be the same.
Okay.
And the adoptive fee schedule is done by resolution by the
Right.
board, so we'll have to set a new fee, make a new fee for this application.
Any other questions, Commissioner?
Sorry.
No, this is very good.
That's all fine. Any other questions from the board? All right, seeing none. Guess we should give an opportunity for public comment. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment. At this point, what is it that you're looking from us? Do we need to approve this, or?
A recommendation to the board for approval with a direction to staff to look at the items that were discussed by the board.
Okay. Looking to entertain a motion from a member of the board.
I will make a motion
Yeah.
to have the clarification and the recommendations to the staff so that we can approve. Is that the recommendation?
Yeah, so I think that, I'm not telling you how to put your motion, but I think if you recommend approval, if you don't have, other than what we discussed tonight, as you see as needing clarification, I would say it's a recommendation for approval with your ask to staff being to clarify those items we discussed before it goes in front of the board.
So I do make a motion to approve,
Recommend approval.
recommend approve, and to have the staff look at the recommendations by the board.
Yep.
For approval.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. All right. Going into closing business. Manager, Director's Report, Dale? Nope, not here.
Dale has nothing.
Not- Does the board have anything to discuss? All right, so next we'll begin the workshop presentations by
Do
Joy
we adjourn the
Giles.
meeting first, or no?
Doesn't say here to adjourn.
Or it's just considered part of the meeting?
Part of the meeting.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay,
All
I
right.
just question.
So presentation by Joy Giles and Nisa Borkert. The workshop.
Okay, so we are now moving into Planning 101. Okay, we're just going to give a brief overview of the comprehensive plan and the land development code and how they work together. So the comprehensive plan is a long-range planning document that provides a framework and policy direction to guide the development of land, economic growth, natural resource protection, and conservation within Seminole County. Established by Florida statute in Chapter 163, Part 2, the comprehensive plan, was first adopted by the Board of County Commissioners in 1977. There are 15 comprehensive plan elements. Each element contains goals, objectives, and policies. The feature land use element of the comprehensive plan defines the maximum density and intensity of a development. Here are those comprehensive plan elements that I mentioned. You see we have the future land use, housing, implementation, solid waste, property rights, and so on. Florida Statutes, Chapter 163, requires all local governments to evaluate the comprehensive plan every 7 years based on findings from an evaluation and appraisal report, also known as the EAR. Other reasons to update the comprehensive plan are changes in state law, changes in local conditions, such as a new regional facility, such as Sunrail, or small area studies in response to locally identified needs. Future land use amendment applications requested by private property owners are also a reason to amend the future land use element. The county must transmit proposed comprehensive plan amendments to the state and land planning agency based on the type of amendment. Bear with me 1 second here. Small-scale future land use amendments, less than 50 acres, have one adoption hearing that go before the board. Expedited state review, future land use amendments of 50 acres or greater, have a transmittal hearing. They're reviewed by state reviewing agencies, which have 30 days to review the request and provide objections, recommendations, and comments. And then there's an adoption hearing. And also I need to back up a little bit. For the 50 acres or more, the large scale, there's actually a transmittal hearing and an adoption hearing. So there are 2 hearings for the Board of County Commissioners. It only comes to this board once, though. A state coordinated review process limited to EAR amendments and large projects. There's a transmittal hearing reviewed by state reviewing agencies, for a period of 60 days for the state agencies to provide objections, recommendations, and comments. And then there is an adoption hearing. Okay, the purpose of future land use categories is to guide growth and development of a community by planning the location and character of mixed-use developments, neighborhoods, commercial, office, and industrial areas, public services, infrastructure, and environmental assets. By planning how land is used, future land use policies ensure compatibility between adjacent land uses, provides for anticipated growth, ensures the availability of public facilities and services, and protects environmental resources. The future land use element of the comprehensive plan defines 15 land use categories. Each category has a maximum density and intensity defined by either a floor area ratio for office, commercial, and industrial categories, or by a maximum density of dwelling units for residential categories. Each future land use category defines a set list of possible classifications, and those are shown here as well as in your packet. So these are all of the possible zoning classifications under each land use. However, that does not mean that all of these zoning classifications are the best fit for the land use. We also take into consideration compatibility and surrounding trend of development. Our land use is captured on our official future land use map, and it's updated through our GIS department and also shown on the property appraiser's website. Future land use amendment standards of review. The future land use amendment of the comprehensive plan, policy FLU 1.6, establishes criteria to be used in the evaluation of proposed future land use amendments consistent with the requirements of state law and including individual site compatibility analysis. These criteria include whether the character of the surrounding area has changed enough to warrant a different land use designation, whether public facilities and services will be available concurrent with the impacts of the development at adopted levels of service, whether the site will be able to comply with the flood-prone regulations, wetland regulations, and all other adopted development policies and regulations, whether the proposal adheres to other special provisions of law and Seminole County Comprehensive Plan, whether the proposed future land use is compatible with the existing surrounding development, and the future land use is in accordance with FLU exhibit compatible transitional land uses. and whether the proposed future land use designation furthers the public interest.
So I'll just butt in a little bit right here, Joy. So, I'm always hammering criteria, look at the criteria. This is your criteria. You may want to mark this page. For every land use, when somebody comes in for a future land use map change, for that request, this is what you have to look at as it pertains to that request. So this is a very important thing to mark and something to review and think about when you're looking at these requests as they come to you.
The future land use element provides a compatibility chart showing compatibility between various land use designations. It shows some land uses that have a transitional compatibility and other land uses that may have compatibility based on additional buffering or, other types of maybe larger lots, things of that nature. Zoning districts and development standards are defined in the Seminole County Land Development Code. Zoning district boundaries are captured in the official zoning map. Future land use policies and zoning regulations work in tandem to create a full picture of how land will be used. While future land use categories help guide the growth and development of a community, zoning regulations define the specific standards for how land is to be developed. Zoning standards establish regulatory requirements pertaining to specific uses, unit types such as single-family or multifamily, building height, lot size, architectural design, buffering and landscaping, open space requirements, transportation, utilities, signage, lighting, and phasing. There are currently 35 zoning categories in the Seminole County Land Development Code. And this is our official zoning map, which again is updated by our GIS department when an ordinance is approved and recorded, and also shown on the property appraiser's website. Rezoning. When a property owner wants to develop a property in a manner that does not conform to the current zoning regulations, they have the opportunity to apply for a rezone. To obtain staff support of a rezone proposal for conventional zoning, the applicant must demonstrate that the proposed rezoning is consistent with the comprehensive plan and is compatible with the overall development in the area and benefits the community as a whole. To obtain staff report of a rezone to PD plan development, the applicant must demonstrate that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, implements any performance criteria, and would result in greater benefits to the county than development under conventional zoning district regulations. Further, the request must meet or exceed arbor requirements and minimize traffic impacts. Some applications may require a future land use amendment, which is typically processed concurrently with the rezone application. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you now.
Yeah, so this is another, under the rezoning page, these are the other two criteria for when you have rezones. These are the other important things that, this is your threshold for what you look at when these come to you, whether it's for a conventional rezoning, C1 to C3, or whether it's for a planned development, A1 to PD or whatever it is. These are the criteria that you'll use for a rezoning. So for both land use amendments and rezonings, they require a public hearing, as you know. First, these come to the Planning and Zoning Board, and you make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and then it goes before the Board of County Commissioners. And Joy talked about how many hearings are needed based upon for comp plans, which is like the size of the development. If it's 50 or more acres, you're going to have 2 hearings in front of the board. And for some rezonings, and you need to have 2 hearings in front of the board, but we don't have to get into that here. You all, thankfully, just have to have 1 meeting before you in considering these requests. Also, I'll point out that 20 days prior to the first public hearing, as you know, Joy always comes in, or whoever's presenting the case, and talks about there's been a community meeting. All developments that are requesting these are required to go through a community meeting before it comes to you. So, next slide, please, Troy. So the public hearing process. Okay, the public hearing process for planning and zoning decisions fall into two categories: a legislative action or a quasi-judicial action. Legislative actions are, for your purposes, going to be adoption or amendment of a comprehensive plan policy, objective or goal, future land use map amendments, adoption of impact fees, but I don't think those come to you, and all other exercises of general policy power of local government. So in legislative actions, these are very broad. They're usually at the whim of the governing body as to whether or not they're correct or not. And they're usually upheld on appeal if there's some rational basis for the reason why you adopted these policies. And in legislative actions, it's still a public hearing. You still have to provide for citizen comment. All right, so when you're looking at these, there's not the quasi-judicial aspect that there is with rezonings. Comp plan amendments are just that. You're writing the rule for this, and that's a legislative action. Next slide, please. On the flip side, there's the quasi-judicial process, and that requires a number of other things. Quasi-judicial decisions are made by applying the existing law to facts of a situation to determine a result. Quasi-judicial processes are similar to court hearings where evidence presented and you all, or the board, as the decision makers, applies the law to the evidence that's been presented. So the requirements of a quasi-judicial hearing are particular. And this is, for your purposes, this will only be as to rezones, although on the next page we'll go through some of the other examples that are also quasi-judicial hearings so you know what they are. Number one, you have to provide notice of the hearing. That's set forth in the Florida statutes depending on the request as far as how you have to do it, publish it in the newspaper, send out letters. You have to afford procedural due process. And what that means is that the applicant has to be given an opportunity to be heard. That's why you all always say, okay, let's hear from the applicant now. The applicant must be able to present evidence and cross-examine witnesses. So what that means is if the applicant disagrees with, for example, Joy's determination on a rezoning and she's saying, oh, you should deny this because of X, Y, and Z, the applicant has the right to ask Joy questions to cross-examine her to try to figure out why she's is of the opinion that she is. And the applicant also has to be informed of all the facts being used to make the decision. And what that means is that's an ode to ex parte communications, which is if and we'll talk about this later, you should not be considering any evidence outside of the hearing on what's being asked of you. So getting information from a neighboring property owner about a request that's coming to you and they talk to you outside of a hearing, or reading something in the newspaper, all those things are outside of the quasi-judicial hearing and shouldn't be used to make your decision. Your decision has to be made from what is presented to you at the hearing, what is provided by the applicant and staff. And that's to ensure the applicant's rights to a fair hearing, to make sure that they know why you're making the decision that you're making and that it's based on what you're being provided here and not outside influences. Another requirement of quasi-judicial hearing is to observe the essential requirements of the law. That's just making sure that we're checking all the boxes on the things that we're talking about, and that you're making your decision on the criteria that's established, which we marked the two criteria that you have to worry about: comp plan amendments, rezonings, and rezoning to plan development. And then as far as your decisions go, and when you're looking at that criteria, you have to make sure that that criteria is competent substantial evidence. And that competent substantial evidence is what's presented to you at the hearing, what's in your staff report, what's in all the attachments to the staff report, what the applicant submits during the hearing, all that is competent substantial evidence. The public, when the public testifies as to factual matters on a case in front of you, the factual matters are competent substantial evidence. You know, they can say, okay, I live in this neighborhood and all the houses are green, and you're building a development next door and you're gonna build all the houses pink, and that's not compatible. Those two colors aren't compatible. They can talk about factually, they know their neighborhood, they know how their neighborhood is, but when they start to get into opinion testimony, such as, this is gonna be a huge traffic problem, unless it's a traffic engineer that's testifying, that's not competent substantial evidence. That's an opinion of a person that there's gonna be traffic problems. So opinion testimony is not competent substantial evidence unless it's an expert opinion. And you can rely on professional reports, testimony by planning and zoning staff, expert testimony, all that is considered competent substantial evidence. So when you're going through the criteria and you're listening to what's being presented in front of you, just be mindful of what is considered evidence that you can base your decision on and what is considered not competent substantial evidence. So as I said before, just to kind of wrap up on this portion, your public hearing falls into two types of proceedings: legislative proceedings and judicial proceedings. Legislative proceedings, as I told you, is comprehensive plan amendments and future land use map amendments. Those are policy decisions. They don't require a quasi-judicial hearing. You can, utilize the criteria and the presentation and make a decision. A public hearing for a quasi-judicial proceeding are things such as special exceptions, variances, site plans, rezone, preliminary subdivision plans, and final plats. All those are quasi-judicial, so you have to follow, you have to make sure you're looking at the criteria, competent substantial evidence, all those kind of things. Does anybody have any questions on that portion? Okay. All right, so board responsibilities. You sit in a dual appointment, I'll call it. You're the Planning and Zoning Commission, and you're the local planning agency. And this chart lays out each one of the establishing laws that sets forth what your responsibilities are. As a Planning and Zoning Commission, that's established by the Seminole County Code, and you're appointed, as you know, by the Board of County Commissioners, and you're the recommending body to the Board of County Commissioners for a review of land development code changes, zoning classifications, real property, and you also make recommendation on, as I said, rezonings, special exceptions, and preliminary subdivision plans for technical review. That's as the Planning and Zoning Commission. Your duties as a local planning agency are that you're appointed by the BCC per the Land Development Code, but also as required by the Florida statutes, because the local planning agency is required by the Florida statutes. Again, you act the same as the recommending body, but your duties as a local planning agency are a little bit different. You review and make recommendation on text changes to the comprehensive plan and propose changes to the future land use designations on real property, so, future land use map amendments. And you also determine consistency between the land development code and the comprehensive plan. And that would also be if you were making changes to the land development code, you would get those changes here, and then you would decide whether those land development code changes are consistent with what the comp plan says. Okay, and just to kind of summarize, to be an effective board member, consider all the information that you're provided in the staff report and the staff presentation. Consider the applicant's presentation. allow the public to address the commission with concerns, which you always do that or support. Look at the comprehensive plan or land development code requirements and utilize the correct criteria for those reviews. During the board meeting, discuss the matter to, make sure you get out any questions or have discussions amongst yourself, and then vote on the recommendation. Now I'll hand it back over to Joy.
Okay, thank you. So now we're just going to touch on the county review process. So, staff review and development review committee process. The process of obtaining development entitlements begins with a pre-application inquiry by the property owner or a potential applicant. A pre-application is an informal inquiry to gather information and process requirements about a proposed development. If the applicant decides to move forward in the process, a formal application for development is submitted. The application is reviewed by the front staff for sufficiency, then routed to all necessary staff members for review. A development review committee meeting is scheduled with the applicant to discuss the comments so they can move forward to either resubmitting if required or, what the next step is. Once staff has fully reviewed and approved the application proposal, which may take several review cycles, the request is then scheduled for the next available Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, followed by the Board of County Commissioners meeting. And this is just a quick who's who in the Planning and Development Division. These are the people that you see on a regular basis at the commission meetings. Of course, Rebecca Hammock is our director. Dale Hall is the division manager. Myself as a current planning principal planner. Kathy Hamill is a principal planner for the Board of Adjustment. You do see her on occasion as well presenting a special exception request. Tammy Brushwood, of course, is the clerk, and Shawnette Williams is our staff supervisor, and then, of course, our legal team as well. And that is going to be it for me. This is where we take a break, but I'm not sure if...
Anybody need a break, or you just want to
not?
push through?
We're good.
I think we'll push through.
Which way do we? I guess we'll press it this way.
you know what? Actually, I think it's different.
Jeff will load it up. While Joy's pulling up the next PowerPoint for portion of the presentation, I just want to note that I forgot to mention when I was talking about the board of responsibilities, in your binder, under Section 3 are the bylaws of the Planning and Zoning Commission and the local planning agency. The bylaws outline how you operate. We went through a number of items that are in here, but this goes through much more. It establishes the quorum, it establishes how the chair and vice chair are chosen and when they're chosen. It talks about voting requirements, which I'm gonna get into now, but there's other things in here, but this is really the document that dictates how you're gonna operate as a board. Okay, for the record, Nasa Borker, Deputy County Attorney. I am going to present to you today Florida's Government in the Sunshine Law and Public Records Law and Ethics. These are three things that all of you need to be aware of. Some of these don't really matter to what you do, or you may not ever have to come in contact with it, but you should know that it's out there. You should know what your responsibilities are under the ethics rules, because it's really important that you follow them. And we'll get into why. Okay, Government in the Sunshine Law. The Sunshine Law is what it sounds to be. Government must be done in the sunshine. It can't be done in the dark, behind the shades, making backdoor deals. It has to be done in the sunshine. So Florida has one of the most stringent open government laws in the nation. And so the Sunshine Law was established to ensure that government work is done in the public. And so to do that, it requires that meetings must be open to the public. The public must have reasonable notice of meetings. Minutes must be taken and properly recorded. And the public has a right to speak on all matters that come before you, except for emergency matters or just ministerial matters. You guys, that's all already taken care of for you, because the chairman nicely lets everybody speak for 3 minutes, and Tammy sends out all the notices, and we record these and provide minutes, so that's already done. So since everything that comes before you has to be done in the sunshine, that means there's some things that you can't do because it has to be done in the sunshine. So what the sunshine law says is that elected and appointed public boards, the sunshine law applies to elected and appointed public boards, you are one of those, and has been applied to any gathering of 2 or more members of the same board to discuss some matter which may foreseeably come before that board for action. In other words, if it is conceivable that the board will consider a matter, it should not be discussed outside of a public meeting. Now, conceivable could mean anything. For your purposes, talking to each other about the vacation that you just went on, or how well your children are doing in school, your grandchildren, all those things are open. But when we start talking about, hey, I heard there may be a Walmart that's coming in over here, off wherever, Ronald Reagan Boulevard, that is something that conceivably could come before you, and not something that should be discussed outside of a public meeting. And this just doesn't apply to oral discussions. It applies to all forms of communication, in-person, telephone, written communication, emails, text messages, conduit individuals, social media, or any other means. The device that you use to communicate doesn't matter. It only matters if what you're discussing could conceivably come before you, or is coming before you, or has come before you. That's another thing you have to be aware of. Say you leave here today, say we had a rezoning request, or a PD rezoning request on the agenda, and you all recommended approval. That is going to come back to you through a preliminary site plan approval, maybe. Maybe they'll have to come back and get a special exception because they forgot to add something. Just because you've approved something here and it's moved on, doesn't mean it won't come back to you, because it absolutely could. I mean, the board could get it and be like, no, we don't want this, we want these changes made, and it could be sent back to you. The applicant could make changes and it may have to come back to you. I mean, that's not out of the realm of possibilities. It's happened. So you have to be very careful about when you're speaking about these things, and how you're talking about them. Okay, if you remember on the last page, I talked about using a conduit. A conduit is the use of a non-member to circulate information or thoughts of an individual members to other members of the board. This is considered using a conduit. A good example of that is if one of you had a question on an upcoming case and you called Joy to talk about it, and you said, hey, I'm not okay with this portion of the request, and I really don't think I'm going to agree to it. And then you wanted Joy to let the other members know. Joy can't do that. She'd be acting as a conduit. Or you getting information through another person is considered use of as a conduit. That's also prohibited. Just in the same line, county staff and other non-members should refrain from asking members their position on a specific matter. That could be considered polling, when you're trying to figure out if something's going to get approved or not, and you're passing that information. That's also prohibited for staff members, and nor should you be trying to obtain that information. Also, when reports are circulated among members, And comments can be seen by other members if other members have made comments. Say, for example, you get a draft land development code provision and you make some comments on it and reply all to an email or something and everybody sees it, you violated the Sunshine Law. Another one that a lot of people got really hung up with more recently is the use of social media. Something innocuous, you make a comment on a post about a matter that may come before you, and another member makes a comment too, and it's your position, I agree or I don't agree, or this is a bad idea. That is considered a meeting out of the sunshine, if it's a matter that may foreseeably come before you. There have been, with you guys, it's not as much of a risk, I think, but with, as you can imagine, being on the Board of County Commissioners, that's a huge risk. You're engaging with the public, you're saying in support, you're trying to get elected, but just be mindful of this, that I always advise my board members, just keep social media for your personal, if you're gonna don't get into anything that may put you in a position where someone could see your position on a matter that may come before you.
She's trying to suggest none of us are friends on Facebook.
Keep it that way. No. So just some general things that you should keep in mind. Don't talk about matters before the meeting starts, during recesses or after the meeting. That's not technically between the meeting. So coming in and saying, hey, we got this matter on the agenda today, and talking about it, you have to save all discussion till the meeting, opens and adjourns. Do not whisper to another member or pass notes during a meeting. Don't talk about public matters in social settings. And do not talk about votes, hearings, or actions after the public meeting, as these matters may come back in different contexts, and I already touched on that before. So I'll give you this terrible example, because the example I'm going to give you is, of course, like the most throw the book at you violation. Back in 2000, and this was a real occurrence, back in 2011, a member of the Florida Keys Mosquito Control Board pleaded guilty to a non-criminal violation of the open meetings / sunshine law. Joan Lord Pappy, a 5-term commissioner, was ordered to pay a $250 fine along with $270 in court cost because she responded to an email from fellow commissioners discussing interview dates for their district director applicants. The original email sent by Commissioner Jack Bridges included a warning that other commissioners should not reply to all to avoid violating the open meetings law. So basically, he sent something out and said, hey, we need meeting dates, but only, respond back to the clerk or, the assistant, whoever was going to set up the meeting. And she replied all with her dates, and that was discussion outside of a meeting. So even that small little something that you wouldn't even think about got her tagged. So that's all to say, don't reply all to emails that Tammy sends you, even to say thank you. Just reply back to Tammy. So as I said, there are penalties for violating the government and the Sunshine Law. Civil penalties can be up to $500. And knowing or an intentional act is not required. So accidentally can get you in trouble. Criminal penalties, including incarceration and fines for any board member who knowingly attends such a meeting or has prohibited contact in violation of the statute, and also reasonable attorney's fees against the local government if you found to have violated the sunshine. So that would mean the county would have to pay for your attorney's fees of the person that caught you, or that of the state in defending your action. Also, any action taken in meeting is tainted by the sunshine is void, which you guys make recommendations, so it's not as, it applies more towards the board. Although, if you did, there's a chance that if the project moved forward to the board and they approved it and the applicant found out about meetings occurring outside the sunshine, or you guys discussing the case outside the sunshine, they could say that since it was void, they never got a recommendation from the planning and zoning board. That could happen, so. In addition, a violation may require the board member to hire private counsel for private suits or for state attorney actions, so, in suits that wouldn't be covered, because you're acting outside of your official board duties. Okay, let's move on from all that nasty stuff. So, government and sunshine laws. So, voting is required. You are required to vote, no matter how much you don't want to sometimes on these cases. You are required to vote. You cannot abstain from voting unless there's 2 instances where you can abstain from voting. If you have a conflict of interest pursuant to section 112-3143, which I'll get into more specifically, and we'll discuss what that is, and in quasi-judicial proceedings, so this is only going to be for rezonings, plan developments, special exceptions, you may abstain from voting on such matters if the abstention is to assure a fair proceeding free from potential bias or prejudice. I've seen this used in an instance, for example, where there was a big box store going into very close to a neighborhood, and one of the board members lived in that neighborhood, very, very close to this. It was going to, not just a big box store, it was a huge commercial development, and they were going to live very close. And they felt as though they could not make a decision free from any prejudice because they were just too close to the request. So they abstained from voting in that instance. So that would be an example of an allowable abstention from voting. All right, voting conflicts. No board member can vote in an official capacity on any measure which would inure to his or her special private gain or loss, or the special private gain or loss of an employer, a parent organization or subsidiary of a corporate principal by which the officer is retained, a relative or business associate of the officer, and relatives are the relatives that, and there, this is crazy, there's actually a list of which relatives. You know, there's further away relatives that it's fine, they can get a little bit of something, but this is like the actual list. Mother, father, son, daughter, husband, wife, brother, sister, father-in-law, mother-in-law, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, but may extend broader to other relatives, such as brother-in-law, if the benefit would impact a relative, such as a sister. So, maybe not a cousin. I mean, cousins aren't on here.
Not a fiance, huh?
No, and that is, that has come up. There are actually ethics opinions for like a person that lives with you.
Yeah.
And they said no. And I'll also note that special private gain or loss is specifically economic benefit or harm, so only money. I had an instance on a board once where one of the board members, it was a CDD board, very much wanted to vote to have his ex-wife removed as the district manager. And I called the Commission on Ethics and said, isn't this a conflict? I mean, it would benefit him from because he wants to get back his ex-wife. He was just really mad at her. And they're like, no, sorry. I mean, it's a terrible thing that he's doing, but it's only economic harm or benefit. So, but that's just a nasty thing to do to someone, just, ugh. Okay, so if you have a voting conflict, but before the vote is taken, you should publicly state to the board the nature of the conflict. Oh, this is my brother's property. I shouldn't vote on this. And name the matter. And then within 15 days after the votes occurs, disclose the nature of an interest as a public record. And there is a form in your book. It's the last page, I believe, the book that you were giving, that is the voting conflict disclosure form. You fill that out and you provide it to Tammy, because she's in charge of the minutes. You cannot, so you can participate in the matter if you disclose at the beginning of the hearing, but you cannot vote. That means you could participate in the discussion, but you could not vote, and that's as long as you disclose it, that, hey, I have a conflict here. And yeah, the memorandum must be filed 14 days afterwards, so we already went all through that. So you can participate, it's probably not advisable to say, hey, I have a conflict, this is my brother or sister's property, and then engage in the discussion and try to convince other board members to vote positively for it. But, I guess technically you could. All right, public records, I'm just going to breeze through. You should know that public records means everything, essentially. Documents, papers, text messaging, voicemail messages, anything that is transmitted, made, or received in connection with the transaction of official business by the agency. So if Chairman Lopez calls Commissioner Lawhon or texts her and says, hey, listen, I have this rental property. Do you know anybody that may be interested in it? Okay. That's fine. That's not transacting official business of the county. That has nothing to do with this. So the public records only apply to when we're talking about your job as a board member. And those matters that may come up, those matters that are going to be before you, all the things that we talked about that the Sunshine Law covers, anything that comes out of that, that's a document or a text or really anything that's tangible, is considered a public record. And if it's considered a public record, that means if somebody asks for it, you have to provide it. And this is just the documents prepared in connection with official business of a public agency and is to perpetuate, communicate, or formalize knowledge. Then it's a public record regardless of the final form, as we talked about before. It can be a taped voicemail message, it can be a text, it can be an email, it can be anything. These are all the things I just talked about that are examples of public records that must be provided absent of an exception. There are exceptions. They're rare, but there are some. These are all the different sources of electronic records. You should know in a strange way, like, social media posts, those have been deemed public records. So now the county has to track all those for their social media site because they're considered public records, and if it's considered a public forum. They can also be on your personal cell phone, as I said, if it's made in the transaction of city business. And there are also a number of penalties involved with the violation of public records. Those are, you can be prosecuted civilly or criminally too, and the county can be assessed attorney's fees for failure to comply. If you get, I don't know if any of you have ever gotten a public records request, but you should try to comply with it as soon as possible because the county can really get tagged if there's lag time in providing those, but that's really all I'll mention on those. This is my last slide, so I expect some smiles. These are the ethics rules. That there's a number of ethics rules, but these are the ones that may sometime actually apply given the positions that you hold on this board. So you cannot solicit or accept gifts from someone if that gift is being given to influence you in some manner for an upcoming decision that you have. You cannot do business with one agency. That doesn't really apply here. You cannot accept unauthorized compensation. Misuse of your position. You cannot say to someone, oh yeah, I will totally vote positively for your request if you let me borrow your Lamborghini. You know, you can't do that. You can't hold conflicting employment. Obviously, that's kind of what we talked about before about, you know, something, if an employer, if one of you were employed by an engineering firm and they were coming up, and actually conflicting employment doesn't really apply because you guys don't hire consultants for the county. So that one would be hard to actually violate. And then disclosure of certain information that's could be used by someone to benefit their case before you. You can't disclose that information for any information you may get. But I doubt that would really happen either. So just be mindful of these. They're kind of self-explanatory. Just do your job fairly, you know? And that's it. Any questions?
Yes.
Okay.
We respond all, when I've responded all to Tammy
Mm-hmm.
on meetings, is that, you know, when we're asked if we're going to have
If you're gonna.
quorum or not, is
yeah.
that?
Yeah, you should just
not a wise
reply
thing?
back to Tammy
Okay.
directly.
Okay.
Yeah. And then Tammy will send out another email and say, yes, we have a quorum, or no, we don't.
Okay.
Regarding public records, do we have any obligation on storing items like our communication emails or social media posts for
So-
a period of time?
So any communications that come from the county, that comes from any county staff, those are all retained in accordance with, it's called a GS1 schedule. That establishes how long a public record needs to be retained, depending on what type of record it is. Records such as, hey, I'm not going to make it to the meeting. Like if one of you sent an email to Tammy, I'm not going to make it to the meeting, that's just called a transitory record. That doesn't have to be retained because it's just giving a heads up. You know, just like if Tammy calls you and says, and leaves on your voicemail, hey, give me a call back, I need to talk to you to see if you're going to be at the meeting, that doesn't have to be retained. And the county, you know, and as far as like social media posts or something that you see, you don't have to retain those. If you keep your social media account private to your friends and family, and you're not, if you're not discussing it with another board member, it's not a sunshine law violation. If you're for some reason on social media discussing it, you know, I don't know that we have a policy that you have to retain that or make a copy of that. But I think if somebody saw it and then they're like, if you said, oh, I'll never vote for this, and the developer saw it, they would use it in other ways if they knew that you said that.
So if requested and if we have it, we have an obligation to turn it over. But
That's
we don't.
right.
But we have no obligation to make sure we have anything.
Yeah, I mean, you should, you know, if you are doing some county business for your board outside of your connection with the staff where it's already being maintained, you should keep a hold of that in case anybody asks, but I can't really think of any instances where that would be pertinent. And if you do have it, typically what happens is if you do get something, okay, a good example is this. This is a good example. Say that somebody finds out you're on the Planning and Zoning Board and is a concerned citizen, and they email you about an upcoming case that comes up. They send it to your personal email, and they're like, we don't agree with this case. If you get something like that, you should immediately forward it to Tammy. And then that's obtained in the record, and then we hold it. So if you do have something like that comes to you, or you have a discussion with somebody, instead of retaining it yourself, you should just forward it to Tammy so that the county can retain it pursuant to the schedule. And that gets you off the hook. That's in that case, you know that you've done that every time. So if a public records request does come in, you can say, oh, I don't have anything because everything I've had, I've forwarded it to the clerk. And so we have it already in our files.
Any other questions?
Sorry, it took me a minute to get there.
Richard, nothing?
What?
I love it.
All question down, huh?
All right. Anything else then?
That's it. That's
All right.
everything I have.
Well, you did a great job. I think
Yes,
this
indeed.
is outstanding, so thank you for
Absolutely.
that. And
Well
this is
needed.
for us to keep, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, like, about any of these things, you can all feel free to email me. I'm here to support the board, or call me. If you don't want to make it a public record, just give me a call, and I can help you navigate through it. I mean, both Tammy has my contact information, or call the county attorney's office, and I can assist you.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Any further business from anybody on the board? Nope, seeing none. The meeting is adjourned.
Do we get a certificate of completion?